Kim had gone with Madeline to the store, and it was just Foster and myself, and he'd had a series of seizures with Foster kind of laying across my lap and me sitting on the linoleum floor of our kitchen. I kind of really cried out to God for the first time. And that's when, I screamed as loud as I could in the quiet of our house and said, "You need to fix them, or you need to take them." Foster had his first seizure, but we really didn't even know it was a seizure. Foster more or less spaced out. He kind of tensed up and then relaxed and fell asleep in her arms. And that was kind of the first signal that maybe there was something going on, but it was really only the first time. From that point forward, as his brain became more developed, his seizures became more involved.
Well, he started having seizures when he was 10 months old. When Foster was 18 months old, we went to the Mayo Clinic, and it was Eric, myself, and him. And I was actually 2 months pregnant with our daughter, Madeline. And we sat in a room. The doctor came in and said, "I think your son has tuberous sclerosis. I'm going to leave you guys here for a few minutes." When he left and Eric and I started reading, the thing that jumped out to me was mentally retarded, severe brain damage. There were all these terms that were flying out at me that I just had absolutely no idea what to think.
Yeah, on one hand, you had a vision of your child and all the dreams and hopes that you had in store for him, all the things that you thought he was going to become. Suddenly, that's not quite the same. You kind of have to stand by and watch what's going on. You don't have the ability to fix anything, and you start to have to dig down deep and kind of pull into your faith. The picture that it painted was pretty bleak. And so from that point forward, the efforts were around confirming the diagnosis. And while we were there, to the extent that we could figure out whether it came from one parent or the other, knowing that Kim was pregnant and that we were expecting our second child, they wanted to try and figure out if there was any risk of this tuberous sclerosis in our developing child. And one of those meetings was with a genetics counselor. You already have one child now whose future probably won't be very good, from a lifestyle as parents, from the demands and healthcare burdens that are going to be required to take care of him, and the worst case scenario that his body would be so crippled from seizures that he would largely be bedridden and not live beyond his 20s. And because of those risks, and the fact that there weren't genetic tests available at the time, and because there was only so much they could do on our child in the womb, that the recommendation was to terminate the pregnancy. The dreams and the hopes that you had for your son, and now the prospect of an uncertain future for your daughter, both of which could be extremely difficult. We had decided we weren't going to terminate the pregnancy, that we were going to see it through, and whatever God had in store for us, that's how we were going to live our lives. And Madeline Grace was born on May 18th, 1999. From a very early stage, she's shown no evidence of tuberous sclerosis, and sometimes we kind of refer to her as our angel, because we believe God blessed us with her.
Foster had many different kinds of seizures, but probably the most devastating seizure he had were the grand mal seizures, and those would completely ravage his body and could last from 5 to 15 minutes at a time. And there was a time that he was having them weekly, and then it was daily, and then it was multiple times throughout the day. We had a point where the seizures were happening so often that they were happening pretty much every hour. And I got called out of the classroom one day, went down to the office, took the call, and found out that he wasn't stopping. And Eric happened to be on a 2-week training session in Arizona, and had to call him. He had to immediately fly home, and we were sent to the hospital. They were able to calm them down some, but they felt like they really needed the Mayo Clinic to be taking care of him, since that was really where his main doctor was at that point.
When Foster was hospitalized and I was trying to fly my way home, they thought they saw something there in his brain and requested the immediate AeroMed from Grand Rapids to the Mayo Clinic for surgery. And in order for Foster to have his brain develop, he needed to have the static removed. And the only way that we could do that, for the most part, was by medication. And the Mayo Clinic didn't think that Foster was a surgical candidate. And so in the months kind of following, in October 1999, it really became a struggle. Kim had gone with Madeline to the store, and it was just Foster and myself, and he'd had a series of seizures. And with Foster kind of laying across my lap, sleeping, and me sitting on the linoleum floor of our kitchen, I kind of really cried out to God for the first time, probably in this whole thing. I screamed as loud as I could in the quiet of our house and said, "You need to fix them, or you need to take them." And so it was on a snowy November night after Thanksgiving, when we couldn't keep Foster's seizures under control and he had to be hospitalized. And we met our pediatric neurologist that was going to kind of help us walk through this.
Dr. O'Donnell was our gift from God. She laid in the bed with our son, and she told us it was going to be okay. And she told us that we were going to be okay, and that we had to take care of ourselves because he was going to be nothing without us.
And she knew of a neurologist in Detroit that was doing some experimental evaluations for kids with tuberous sclerosis. And that's kind of what started the next 2 years of evaluating Foster for his surgical candidacy and eventual surgery. Now that Foster's 5, the question is he going to be too old for surgery? Because his brain may be a little more too developed. We kind of have to decide what to do. And we chose to have surgery. The first surgery was designed to place a series of recording devices on the surface of his brain. So with those electronic devices sitting on the surface of his brain, the day before the surgery, they did one more series of tests, and instead of recording electrical activity coming from the brain, they actually forced current onto the surface of the brain. And by doing that, they were actually able to map out where his motor cortex was and where the functional areas were. Foster was going to have surgery on the left side where the seizures seemed to be coming from, that his motor cortex was there and everything that controlled the right side of his body was going to be on that side. And his speech centers were supposed to be there too. And if they did have to cut into those areas to control the seizures, was he going to be paralyzed? Was he not going to be able to have the same level of speech capabilities and communication? Was he going to have the ability to understand? Because so many of the areas that you and I use are on the left side. So what we were able to know going through that last test was that all of the areas that are normally there on the left side had already been rewired to the right side of his brain.
In the moment, you're just wondering, what's God's plan for us? What's God's plan for him? And you're not understanding, and you're thinking, come on, God, when are you going to move? And, we're more concerned about our timing than his. And then when we look back on his path, he didn't have his surgery till he was 5, and maybe everything just fit. And it was amazing how the puzzle pieces just came together.
And so Foster went into surgery, his second surgery, for 11 hours. When Foster came out of surgery, it was as though everything that God had in store for him finally was unveiled. When we look at and think back to when we sat in that room with Foster and we're looking through that brochure of this is tuberous sclerosis and this is kind of what it means for you and your children, that was going to start, kind of a very significant chapter in our marriage.
I think at the time we felt like our world was crashing in on us, and now that we look back, we realize that that's one of the pieces that's made us stronger as a family, and it's given us a purpose, and it's made us that perfect family that we always imagined that we could be.
So we sit here kind of today, 10 years after Foster came home, and he's been seizure-free ever since. But we're also 13 years from when we were told we should abort our daughter. And she's just fine too. And that's why we're here today, is to praise who's responsible and thank all those who have supported us and have prayed for us and at times carried us when we didn't feel we could carry ourselves. Kind of flashing back to that time in November when I had our son on the floor a couple years earlier, when I was shouting out to God to move or to take him. There was really only one thing that I wanted, which was a healthy son. God is faithful to those who seek him. And we'll lay our praise at his feet.